when we speak about loving kindness, the way normally it's understood in the vernacular, a person needs help. That means it borders on needy. He's needy. He needs financial assistance. He needs a loan. He needs a job because he has no means of income. Provide him with a job if you could. Give him charity if you can. Give him food if he doesn't want to eat. But it's much more sophisticated than that. I'll give you an example. There's a negative commandment in the Torah. There were two nations. There's the Ammonites and the Moabites. Who are these two nations? What was their pedigree? There's a story in the Torah, Lot. He escaped from Sodom and Gomorrah. He was saved by the angel. In the merit of Avram, that's why he was saved. And he went to a cave with his two daughters. And they believed, the daughters, that the world came to an end. The world was destroyed. It was like cosmic destruction, Sodom and Gomorrah. And they believed that unless they are impregnated by their father, there's no way to perpetuate existence. Because the only three surviving members of existence are the three of them, the father and the two daughters. So what do? They found wine in the cave. They gave their father wine to drink. They got him drunk. And the older daughter went and had her father impregnate her. And she encouraged the younger daughter also to have relations with the father. And both of them conceived two sons. The older daughter named her son Moav. In Hebrew, the word Av means father. She made it public knowledge. This child is the issue of my father. Incestuous issue. The other daughter, being much more refined, didn't want it to be public knowledge who fathered the child. She called him the son of my nation. Ben Ami. So his name was Ammon. So the older daughter's son was Moav and Ammon. Okay. Later they realized that it was only limited to this location, and the whole thing was a mistake. And it wasn't justified, but in their minds it was. Okay. Why was Lot saved from Sodom? He was a bad guy. He chose to go there to live in this very evil society. That only reflected his quality of person. Nevertheless, because he was the nephew of Avram, in Avram's merit, God sent an angel to save his life, him and his two daughters. The others weren't interested in leaving. They took it lightly. They said nothing's going to happen. So they perished. Fast forward, the Jews left Egypt, were in the desert. The 40th year, and the Ammonites, which today are large nations, and they don't offer us hospitality. No bread, no water, nothing. But what did they do? They commissioned Bilam, the prophet of the world, to curse the Jews. I mean, money to curse the Jews you have, but money to provide bread and water, that you don't have. So because you did not offer your hospitality to the Jewish people when they're in the 40th year in the desert, therefore there's a negative commandment. God says an Ammonite and a Moabite can never, even if they convert to Judaism, they're considered illegitimate. They cannot marry into the Jewish people. That's it. So the Rabbad Nachmanides explains, why is it such a serious claim against them? Moab and Ammon, they understood where they came from. Where did they come from? Lot was their founding father. Lot was the founding father of both of these nations. And Lot was what? Was the nephew of Avram. Avram went to battle to save Lot's life when he was taken captive by the four kings. Everything Lot was only due to Avram. The Jewish people are the descendants of Avram. Just based on the laws of reciprocation, of gratitude, don't you think you should offer your bread and water to his descendants? How could you be so corrupted and to be such ingrates, not even to offer you bread and water? So because they're so corrupted in this area of Chesed, God says, I don't want them to marry the Jewish people because they will dilute the quality of Chesed among Jews. Avram is known as the pillar of kindness, loving kindness. So allowing this deficient, corrupted, perverted nation who are corrupted in this area, they will undermine the quality of Chesed in Jews. Therefore, they cannot marry into the Jewish people. They're considered illegitimate, even if they convert. That's how the Ramban explains. So, but there's a midrash. The midrash says, when Avram hosted the angels initially, he thought they came in human form. And he thought they needed hospitality. He offered him bread. He offered him the shade of the tree. He offered him water. He did all that. What was the value? Because he offered the shade of his tree, what did we merit as Jews in the desert? The 40 years that we had the clouds of glory that protected us was because Avram offered the shade of his tree. As the shade of the tree protected these wayfarers, God says, I will provide protection for your children when they're in the desert. As you provided bread for these wayfarers, I'll provide the manna for your children. As you provided water for the wayfarers, I will provide the wellspring of Miriam for your children. That's the measure for measure. But there's a question to ask. He may have offered the bread, the water, and the shade. But was in those three areas, was there a beneficiary of those three offers? What he offered? An angel doesn't eat food. He didn't know there were angels. An angel doesn't eat bread, doesn't eat water, doesn't eat shade. They only came in human form. So there he did chesed, but there was no beneficiary of the chesed. You following? There was a benefactor, but there was no beneficiary. I'll give you an example. A person administers life-saving techniques to a corpse because he doesn't know what's alive, what's dead. And afterwards, turns out all along he was administering, the person died 24 hours earlier. He did life-saving measures to what? It had no value, meaningless. Avram Avinu, when he offered his water and bread and shade, he thought they were humans. So there was a benefit, but factually there was no beneficiary. So why did Avram, for his offering of his hospitality, why were the Jewish people such beneficiaries where there was no beneficiary? You have the question. So the Medrash says something phenomenal. Here we have a situation. There was a benefactor and there were no beneficiaries. And look to what degree God rewarded Avram for doing the act of kindness, although there was no beneficiary. So if you could imagine if you have a benefactor and there is a beneficiary, how much greater is the value of that chesed? That's the medrash. Not finished. Here, where there was no beneficiary, look what resulted. As a result of that act of kindness, so if there is a beneficiary, well, it'll make a difference. That person's life, there's no question, it has that special value. Let's fast forward now. 40th year in the desert. Excuse me. We in the desert, we had manna. We didn't need that bread. We had water. We didn't need that water. But yet we find that they're faulted and condemned for not offering their bread and water. And because of that, they're disenfranchised forever. They can never marry into Jewish people. So the question is like this: what happens? So there's a takeaway. Here, they did not offer hospitality to people who did not need their hospitality. We had our own bread, we had our own water. And look to what degree they were condemned. So a person who denies hospitality to a person who needs hospitality, he definitely deserves to be condemned. Right? That's the takeaway. Here we didn't need the hospitality. We had the manna, we had the water. I look to what degree to condemn. So if a person truly needs the bread and water and you withhold it, there's no question you deserve to be condemned. So the question, bottom line is, so what is the claim against the Ammonites and the Moabites? They knew we had the manna. They knew we had the wellspring. So they said, of course we'd give them bread. We'd give them water. But they had their own. They had sufficient provisions. They didn't need it. So if that's the case, what's the claim against them? That they condemned, they can never marry into the Jewish people. They're always considered illegitimate. Right? So the way I understood it was this. Sometimes it's not the bread, it's not the water. We've been wandering for 40 years in the desert. Nobody extended a welcome mat to us. We have water, we have bread. But at least the gesture of offering bread and water, so-called for old time's sake, would have made us feel we're welcome. It would have given us a sense of value. The answer is, our level of kindness is, you need bread, you need water, will satisfy your hunger. The higher level of understanding what a person needs, to go into another person's mind and emotion, to satisfy his needs, that they didn't have. That special level of sensitivity, that's the Jewish sensitivity. So they condemn not because they didn't offer the bread and water, for the bread and water. The welcome flag mat should have been extended to make us feel we're welcome, especially when there was a debt of gratitude here. Because we are the descendants of Avram. Look what Avram did for your father. You exist only because of us. Don't you think minimally you should have said, welcome, why don't you come in? That's the claim. So we speak about Chesed. Chesed is not, I'll give you the job. It's how you give the job. You don't make the person feel like he's a beggar. I'll tell you a personal story. Many years ago, when people had very little, I had a rich uncle. And when he bought his car in the late 50s or mid 50s, his car had air conditioning. It was unheard of. A car had any air conditioners. I think it was a DeSoto. DeSoto had air conditioning. You ever get a model with air conditioning? And okay. So what happened? He passed away. He was 65 years old, and he was a very rich man. He was a millionaire when people didn't barely put food on the table. And he had just bought new clothing, beautiful coat for a few $100s in those days, which was a substantial amount of money expenditure. So after my uncle died, he had an older son who must have been maybe 20 years older than I was, 25 years older. And he says to my mother, maybe one of us could use the coat. Yeah. And he never wore it. It still had the bill in the pocket for when they bought the coat. So my mother said, we're not sure of that. He said, look, I prefer to give it to you than give it to a Puerto Rican. That's what he said it. If I'm going to give it away, might as well give it to you. Why should I give it to a Puerto Rican? Not that he wants to give it to us. You understand? Is that what you say? And if not, I'll give it to a Puerto Rican. So you might as well take it. That's the way you offer, do a nice gesture. Say it's something special, why don't you take it? You don't say, because what's the alternative? It's like I said, when Yaakov worked 7 years for the hand of Rachel, so what did Lavan say to Yaakov? Of course, I prefer to give it to you than give it to somebody else, to some vagabond. Is that, if you appreciate who Yaakov is, you die to have such a son-in-law. This man radiates like the sun. You say, well, I might as well give it to you, but rather give it to a stranger. Is that why you give it? Why you're choosing Yaakov as a son-in-law? Same idea. You don't begin appreciating who Yaakov is. You don't even know what it means to Chesed. I forgive you, then throw it in the trash. Is that a reason why you should give it to a person that you give it to a person so you should benefit from it? Not because the alternatives you're throwing it in the trash, but the sensitivities. And if a person speaks that way, I always say, way a person expresses itself, it speaks volumes of who the person is and where he's coming from. And that's the issue. So we speak about chesed, Ahavas chesed. That means you don't leave a stone unturned. You're always being creative, understanding what another person's needs are, to be able to provide something which will make a difference in another person's life. I'll give you an example. Person is a hospitable person, and he invites somebody. So the wife says, if you're inviting somebody, they'll eat what we're eating. The person has a chef in the kitchen, a cook, whatever you want to call it. Why? If you want to really host the person properly, he may not like the food we're eating. We'll ask him, what would he like? He has something which is outlandish, unreasonable, it's one thing. But he says, I normally don't eat meat because I'm a vegetarian. So you provide him with fish. Say, no, this is our menu. We eat meat. You don't like, go find yourself another place to eat. Two ways to treat. If you're really hospitable persons, we'll accommodate you. We'll get you a fruit plate. We'll get you a vegetable plate. We'll get you something else. Hospitality is always addressing the need of the guest. Not, I'll share with you what I have. Sometimes that's sufficient, but it goes beyond it. So if a person has a certain sensitivity to kindness, to doing acts of kindness, you put yourself in the other person's position. What are his needs? And that's the way you do kindness. People ask me a question. We'll take this off the recording.